keep it as simple as possible. If it's complex, it won't happen. If it's simple, it probably will. So I will tell people, okay, you just had this case go through. Take 10% of that goes into your marketing fund right now. It's like taxes. Don't touch it. It goes over there. Don't touch it. That helps to build a marketing slush fund that you can use if something that's not on your marketing plan comes up, but you want to fund it. You've got something that's sitting there and it's growing behind you because it's constantly being funded.
Welcome, Model FAs. David DeSell here, president of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. I have a really great guest for you today. We're going to be talking about how you should be marketing your business compared to how larger firms think that you should market your business, as well as hitting into some practice management ideas for you as well. So we have Greg Bishop here today after having worked for many years in financial services as a marketing director, practice management director, chief marketing officer, and national level public speaker. Greg followed a lifelong dream and launched his own consulting firm. And that firm is called Poterus Consulting. And through Poterus Consulting, he's created a structured but malleable platform where individual advisors, financial planning teams, producer groups, and financial firms can increase productivity exponentially. His approach confronts many of the behavioral impediments that slow practice growth while simultaneously addressing practice structure, strategic planning, marketing, and accountability. As a result, Poterus Consulting clients consistently enjoy double-digit growth year over year, and their success, which I can certainly relate to, is his ongoing motivation. So without further ado, Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Glad to be on.
Awesome. So give us some context. So I know we had obviously an intro call before, we started with this podcast here, and you had mentioned that you've worked with some pretty large firms, MetLife and Guardian, and you did that for a number of years. So give us a sense as to what your journey looks like.
Sure. Well, my journey began in New England. I'm from Maine originally, and I was the director of marketing for MetLife of Greater Maine. And there I'm working with a relatively small group, about 28 agents in a few locations. And what I noticed is that my role as the marketing director basically was strung out across three different tiers. So the first tier was, what is MetLife doing nationally and globally? And what happens when that information arrives at our firm? The second tier was how to promote that local MetLife office throughout the region where we were. So Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, parts of Massachusetts. Then the third tier was individual work with the advisors. What are they doing with their personal marketing plans? And how can the name MetLife help them moving forward? So doing that for a while, I realized that a lot of what was coming out of these big firms from the central offices, from the main offices in New York and New Jersey, it seemed as though it was made in a lab and not really made in the field. And when these different projects would arrive or marketing ideas would arrive, I'd open the box like Christmas morning and start taking out this collateral, the support pieces and the ideas and the concepts. And one of the first things I would do is break it apart. I'd start tearing out the individual pieces. There were some great ideas in there. There was some great material, nice glossy folders, all of that. But I realized it didn't really address the needs of the advisor at the pointy end of the stick. So I would take a lot of these programs, break them apart, rebuild them, and then relaunch them, and started getting noticed because as these companies, MetLife is just one of them, but it was a habit I developed in different companies. As they measured performance numbers, they started noticing, we would grow a little brighter on the heat map. So a lot of questions were asked, hey, how is it that you are creating distance between yourself and some of the other firms? And I discussed some of my ideas. And that's when it really went back up to the main people in the big office, the ivory tower, they used to call it. In the ivory tower, they realized they should probably engage the people that are on the ground and at the pointy end of the stick more often. That turned into an advisory council where they took 11 marketing directors from around the country and brought them on the advisory council. And I was on that council. And I was encouraged because now they were listening to what was going on in the field. So success there led to another offer, moved to a much larger firm, MetLife's third largest firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's where I live now with my family. But there I went from a small firm with just a few locations to 206 reps in 22 locations. And all of those concerns I had came along with me. So it was a question of breaking this down again, looking at some of the programs that were there. There was a massive lead program that was coming in. And the way in which those leads were distributed, again, I took that all apart. I went in there with a hammer, broke it all up, and changed the lead flow process and the accountability with that. And again, met with some success. Got onto a team at that point that traveled around the country. So earlier successes, a lot of hard work, paying attention to some of the indicators that were out there and then incorporating that into what we were doing, changed a lot of things for people.
So what did you notice as you were going through that journey that you just shared with us, as far as how MetLife or whatever kind of corporate office you were involved in, how they thought someone or an advisor should market compared to how you think that individual should market? Like you mentioned that you would open up the box, so to speak, and, start picking it apart, keeping the stuff that was great, trying to tear out the stuff that wasn't. Like, what were some of the things that their corporate marketing department was putting out there that you were just like, this isn't going to work and here's why? Help me sort of understand how the big firm views marketing compared to how an individual should view marketing.
What I realized is that in building a lot of these programs, they had to have them watered down enough so that they would work marginally well in all areas of the country. So they had to develop a program that would work with everyone, but it didn't necessarily work with everyone. So what I got into was more of the personal habits. And since creating Poterus and going out and doing this on an individual basis, I've discovered that no two reps are the same. And as a matter of fact, probably if I looked at my client base right now, at either end of the spectrum, you wouldn't even recognize them as being from the same field because they're so different. So the large firms try to create this cookie cutter idea that they think will work with everyone. And in actuality, it only works with a few. So I started getting more into what are the individual marketing plans, and can I take some of the material that the larger firms have that they're getting from the corporate offices and make them work for the individual. So I reverse engineered. I started at the smallest piece and worked up instead of the reverse, which was take the larger pieces and work down.
Makes sense. Now, how often did you find that either those marketing ideas from the top were able to be used compared to, hey, we just need to scrap this all together? And then, perhaps you can share an example or two as to, a marketing idea that the corporate office was pushing for. Like, what was that? And why, in your opinion, did you think that it wasn't effective outside of, perhaps it was too kind of general in nature?
Well, it was a lot of the stuff they did was global. It was meant to be watered down so that more people could partake, but the success, the conversion ratios weren't that high. And a lot of the people that I've worked with during my time with some of these big companies and since, they're looking for their individual niche. They want to be independent. What they were trying to do was really use the name, the large name, to help them, to give them credibility and integrity. So that was useful in that part. If you could walk in and say, hey, I represent company A or company B, and they were recognizable names, that helps you. But a lot of the programs that they were launching, the lead programs, how we're going to penetrate certain markets, it really was not conducive to the individual pockets around the country. So something that might work in Chicago would have no chance of working in Charlotte. And something that might work in Boston is not going to work in Dallas. Again, you had to have these programs so generalized that they would work in those environments. And sometimes you give up. You give up some of the ability, the conversion properties when it's so generalized. So again, I was trying to take some of the pieces I thought that would work, some of the recognizable pieces, and really make that work for the individual.
Cool. Yeah, I think most everyone can agree around the importance of picking a niche and communicating that niche. Like, one thing that we've done for our clients is we put together what we call client journey maps. So under the assumption that when someone's considering working with an advisor, they go through different stages of questions, like the discovery stage, the evaluation stage, so on and so forth. And if you can create your marketing material, which I'm sure you'd agree with this, if you can create your marketing material to answer those questions for that specific avatar, be it a business owner, a retiree, whatever it may be, and put out those marketing materials, content, videos, whatever you want to call it, immediately they feel called to and they feel like their questions are being answered because you're kind of meeting them where they're at, and it allows you to build a relationship over time, as opposed to, if you just put out some information around the benefits of, Roth versus traditional accounts or whatever. So would you agree that it kind of makes sense to speak directly to a specific type of avatar with your marketing material and content?
Yeah, that's a great segue. One of the things I developed after I launched Poterus is that I have a fact finder I go through with every individual that I work with. And much like advisors that go through a fact finder, mine touches on each of the 7 stages of that practice management program that I've developed. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a program, and you mentioned it earlier, structured but malleable. I wanted to have structure behind this practice optimization program, but I wanted the ability to customize it to the individual. So as I went through this fact finder in these 7 areas, I could find out what the strengths and weaknesses were for this particular advisor, what their market niche was going to be, what they'd done in the past, what their plans were for the future in terms of production numbers or for target market penetration ratios. The fact finder was fairly comprehensive. When I first came up with the idea, I thought, okay, I have to ask enough questions so I can get to the bottom of this. But what I realized after the first draft, I've asked far too many questions because I realized it could go in 100 different directions. So I cut it down. It's still fairly comprehensive, but I think what you've touched on is important. Everybody has an individual approach. There are certain people they will work with well. There are others they will not work with well. And finding that out, that's how this program was a little bit different. Because the larger programs that are dealing with massive numbers, you lose that individuality.
So you mentioned a moment ago about the 7 different steps sort of in your process, or 7 stages within your practice management program. And perhaps we can pick a few today to kind of dive a little bit deeper on, but what are they, kind of 1 through 7, so that we have context, and then I'll follow up with diving deeper on a few of those points.
Okay. And it's in no particular order, because what I do is vision is where I always start, because you have to start there. But I treat it like a Venn diagram, because you can't deal with each one of these individually and exclusively because there's so much overlap. So if you look at, we start with vision, then we may go into roles and responsibilities. Then we go to communication, both internal and external, marketing, business financials, and then accountability. And when I start through this journey with people, I'll figure out during the fact-finding stage which area needs the most attention, maybe where they're lacking, where they're strongest. So we can adjust how much time we spend in each area, depending on what their strengths are. And it's funny, when I first started doing this, I'd have people say, vision, okay, yeah, whatever. Can we skip to the next one? And it shocked me how often, when I got into conversations about vision statements and mission statements and the difference between the two, that no time was spent on that. And then it goes back to the original reason for launching Poterus. These large firms were great at product training, but there was very little practice management training. They would train them up, they would teach them all the different products, give them a little slap on the butt and send them out into the big wide world and say, good luck. Mm-hmm. And it's not a recipe for success. So it shocked me in the beginning, but now I realize not enough time is spent on vision and seeing, our conversation before. What's the Emerald City? Okay, what does it look like? You see it in the distance. It's like the Wizard of Oz. You're on the yellow brick road and you see it in the distance. You know that's what you want. It's gorgeous. You want that to be your future. So I have to spend time with people, getting them to articulate and really the crystallization of that vision. And once we have that, it's a lot easier to roll into the other areas. I can't talk about marketing or business financials and how we're going to fund marketing programs if we don't know what the vision is. I can't get into the roles and responsibilities of different team members or different corporate people that we're going to tap into, wholesalers, whoever it may be, if we don't have that vision.
So, and I agree wholeheartedly. I want to dive a little bit deeper on that. The 3 points that stick out to me the most that I find are some of the biggest areas of opportunity for advisors to focus on is the vision and visualization, as you alluded to. So I got some questions about that. The second one being business financials, because that allows you to kind of make data-driven decisions for hiring, firing, scaling, all that type of stuff. And I feel like advisors, generally speaking, do a fantastic job in helping clients with their financials, but perhaps not as good of a job on their own financials. And then lastly, accountability. I think that's something that either you absolutely love or you dread, and it's probably one of the most impactful aspects of your business is being held accountable to doing things that are in alignment with your vision. So with vision, if I'm sitting here and I happen to start, my career in financial planning and I've never done a vision, how do I start even putting that together? Is it for, a vision for the next week, the next year, the next 10 years? Like, what does that process look like, and what sort of parameters should I stay within in terms of timeframes as I'm trying to articulate that?
It used to be a common practice was let's have a 1, a 3, and a 5-year business plan. And then people would attach their vision to those 3 stages. I don't spend a lot of time looking at the 5-year plan because I've seen so many shifts in the industry and I've seen so many shifts in behavior from people. So there may be that long, far off distance 5-year vision, but what I really try to concentrate on is something that's a little shorter on the timeline because I want them to be able to see it and really own it. If it's too grandiose, it doesn't really have a lot of merit. It's hard for them to put their arms around it. So I shorten the timeline a little bit. And when I start with the vision, I go into core values. I ask them, who they are as a person. What are some of the traits that represent you or how you want to be seen? So we start to pick out words. I'll give them a list of words, of different adjectives. And I'll say, put check marks next to 7 of the words you think that best describe who you are as a person, how you want to be seen. And then we'll whittle that down to, okay, what are the 5 most important out of the 7? And then from those 5, pick 3 words that you want to make sure appear in a vision statement that we're going to create together. And it really hones them in on what they want to be. And you see words like integrity and honesty pop up all the time. And I make sure that that's woven into how they communicate themselves in their practice to the outside world. And then we'll flip from that vision of how they want to be seen and how they want to operate, what that practice is going to look like, is we'll go to the mission statement, which is now more the day-to-day parameters that make the vision possible. So when we're on this mission, I guess what you could say is if the vision is the Emerald City in the distance, the mission statement articulates what the paving stones are in that yellow brick road that get us to the vision. And once we spend a lot of time in those areas, they really start to see what their practice is going to look like in the future. But in the beginning, if I say, hey, just write me a vision statement, they're generally a disaster because they haven't gone through that process before, that thought process of really diving deep into who they are and how they want to be for their clients and how they want to be seen by their clients.
Yeah, I think what I found to be super effective, in addition to what you said with vision, just like little things. One is, in my opinion, writing it in the first person as if it's already happened. So, as an example, I woke up today on June 30th, 2025. I walk out and then kind of painting the picture as if it's already happened, found has been super powerful for people to kind of envision themselves already there. And part of the importance of vision, as you know, is it kicks into gear your reticular activating system, your RAS, so that your brain can filter all the relevant information that's needed to actually get you to that vision. And I would go as far as to say, and this is kind of a hokey take, but I believe in it, where I don't think that our brains necessarily know the difference between reality and like our vision. So if we're practicing visualization a lot as well, like our brain just thinks that that's the truth, and things are going to come into your life that make those actually possible in reality. So I think it's important to not just put together a vision about your business, but integrate your personal life as well, your relationships, your money, the things that you like to do. And honestly, I would reread your vision at a minimum on a weekly basis, especially when the days are tough. So you can remind yourself why you're doing, what you're doing and why you're dealing with what you're dealing with. So I just want to make that note that it's not good enough, in my opinion, to just put together a vision, but you need to review that vision fairly frequently.
That's a great point. There was a team that I was working with, and I think there were 9 people that were on this team. We spent a lot of time on the vision. And the leader of this team, I had him make sure he honored the comments from everybody on the team. Even though, hey, You're the big dog. Everybody gets it. But if you're going to act like a team, everybody's opinion has to be validated. So we spent a considerate amount of time on his vision statement for his team. The next thing we did is there was very little structure in terms of communication. I referenced that internal and external communication. So I put him in a situation where team meetings were to be held every single week at the same time, predictability, and no meeting was to be kicked off without an agenda. There are going to be bullet points about what we're discussing. There's some things that we're going to cover every single week. There's going to be some new stuff. The first thing that appeared on the agenda of every single meeting was the vision statement. And I had him go around the room, and each person had to read off the vision statement to start the meeting until it got to the point that the vision statement was no longer needed on the agenda because everyone had it memorized. And we just picked somebody to do it. And then another example, and I'm saying this because I love your comments about that being a daily or weekly thing. I had an advisor that went out and contracted a woodworker to actually take his vision statement and engrave it in wood, really nicely done and finished. And it's in the wall in the lobby of his office. So that as clients come in, they realize what the priorities are for that team.
I love that. I think it's important if you're going to write a vision, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with those that are going to be impacted by you fulfilling that vision, because then what happens is people want to help you get there, right? They want to be a part of it. And the more people you share it with, the more opportunities there are for people to come out of the woodworks and actually help you get there.
Yeah.
So we have the vision, you said the mission, which is kind of the yellow brick road type of analogy to the Emerald City being the vision itself. And I think we take it a step even further, which is, okay, the vision's fine, the mission's fine, but then there becomes, the specific action items, the specific things that you need to do to get ultimately on that path into the Emerald City, as you put it. And with that, assuming that we have those things identified, comes accountability.
That's right.
So what have you found works best in terms of accountability? Is it just self-accountability and willpower? Is it, meeting with someone once a week, every other week, once a month? Who could be their accountability buddies, so to speak, within their world? Like, is it something that they have to pay for, or is it something that they can get from someone that they're already, kind of connected to? How do you think about accountability in general, assuming that the action items have been identified for the things that need to, get done? Right.
And parts of everything what you said come into play. There are people that have a mentor, somebody that's been in the industry for a while to whom they look to, they get advice. They might have a weekly meeting. It could be a coffee or a breakfast. That can be somebody that lends to that, but it's not a full accountability coach. What I try to teach when we go through this and the coaching that I do is more self-accountability, because it has to start there. I think part of getting another mentor or an accountability coach, that in and of itself shows self-accountability, because you're taking the step to make sure that it happens. A lot of what I do when we do time management and I go through calendaring and prioritization, I have each one of the advisors I'm working with put in what's called an accountability block every week. And what we do in that accountability block should be about 30 minutes, it may be an hour in the beginning. But in that block, you do self-evaluation on your performance that week. And I have an accountability block in my calendar. And so I use it as an example. It's I don't just talk about this because I think it sounds cool. I talk about this because I understand its importance. So let's say your accountability block is just after lunch on a Friday. So at 1:00, you're going to spend time going back through your week. What was it like for my marketing, my outreach? Did I deploy everything I wanted to? Did that email campaign launch? Was I on that podcast? Did I reach out to the clients that I had targeted for that week? And then grade yourself on a scale from 1 to 10. And what I'll tell people is that if you have an 8, and again, this is all internal, but you're saying, okay, I was about an 8 this week. I'm going to be honest with myself. No use in lying to myself. 8's a pretty good week. I hit on a lot of things I wanted to do. I see where I'm going to grow. A lot of the tasks I had assigned myself were accomplished. That's great. If it's a 4, this is where it becomes very important to do self-analysis and figure out why that happened. Were failures attributed to a program you had that was ill-conceived? Was it that you were not on top of the things you thought you would be on top of? Did you try to put a 60-hour work week into 40 hours? There are a lot of factors that you have to analyze. The value of it is that once you understand what may have gone wrong or where you may have missed and where you scored yourself a 4, is how do I make sure that doesn't happen again? And then that goes into the accountability piece. Recognize where there may have been failures. Not everything is going to be rainbows and fireworks. There are going to be problems that you come across. There are going to be barriers. There are going to be impediments that have to be addressed. And what I've discovered is that an individual advisor, when on their own, without that level of accountability, will pass right on by this and get right into the next week without any adjustment, without any acknowledgement of where there may have been struggles. That's a problem. So if there is accountability, you address those issues. The attempt is that it won't happen again, or at least I'm going to minimize the impact. If you don't spend that time in that accountability block addressing performance, you're destined to repeat it.
I agree. As you were going through that, I pulled up my calendar because A, I think you'd appreciate this, and B, I think it may be helpful for some of the folks who are listening, but I'm very much a student of my calendar. And so to the point where I have some of those things that you mentioned, where I have weekly planning on my calendar from 3 to 4 every Friday, which is a mixture of reflection and then planning for the adjustments moving forward. Once a month, I extend that by 30 minutes. So it's a 90-minute block to do that same reflection on a monthly basis. But then I even take it one step further. And this is only taking 15 or 20 minutes, but I do it at the end of every day as well. The reason why I would do that is in my prior life, when I was an advisor, if I got rocked, dealing with negative stuff or business wasn't going well or whatever, I'd let that affect me for like 2 or 3 months. And then I finally snap out of it, typically through taking action and actually doing something about it. But then I wanted to get that down to, okay, I need to do this stuff on every month basis. So I trained myself from, call it, having it affect me for 2 to 3 months down to a month. Then it went down to a week because I was reflecting it more. So if that's the case, then why not just do it on a daily basis for 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes and catch it in a day. And that way you can show up that next day. So I 100% agree with what you're saying. I think that once you get into a habit of doing that, however, and the structure of that time with yourself, you can also go as far as to doing it on a daily basis,
right?
Because I'd rather get to the point to where I could pivot the next day as opposed to waiting for the next week to figure out. So just some additional thoughts on my end that I wanted to share because I think it was complementary to what you were just positioning.
Yeah, and this fits in well. The time management that I talked about, there's 2 different things that I do when it comes to time management. The accountability is a big part of it, but I have the analysis itself on what I call the time shocker. So when I work with advisors on this initially, it's painful. They don't like it. And I know they're not going to like it. So I just have to be mentally prepared for the fact that they're not going to like it. But what I do is I have them go back 3 weeks in their calendar and we start plotting how time was used in major categories. So I have a grid set up that's broken out into 4 different areas, everything from, client engagement to administrative responsibilities. And what we do is we start plotting in 15 and 30-minute blocks what people did over the course of their day. And in each one of those 30-minute blocks, there may be gaps, right? There's a 30-minute block that's not filled in. That's fine. You need to expect that. But I have them put in everything. You have time for reflection and growth. I think it's fantastic. I ask people, do you go to the gym? Yeah, I try to get into the gym just before I come into the office. Okay, you've got your workday here plotted out that's starting at 7 a.m. and going to 7 p.m. Are you in the gym at 7? They're like, yeah. Okay, put it in. Like, well, that's not really work stuff. I'm like, no, we're plotting your day. We're not plotting just work stuff. We're plotting your day. So we'd go through the analysis and you can look at it most days. Like if you have a basic 8-hour day, let's say it's broken out into minutes, it's 480 minutes. Well, they start plotting in everything that they have on the calendar. Then they get to the end and it actually does all the conversions. It calculates all the minutes that you've typed in and what would be left over. And that's what I call drift. So they look at me and they say, okay, what's my drift? I said, your drift is 6.7 hours. And they say, is that bad? I said, well, it's basically a work day. He goes, well, I must have been doing something else there. I'm like, I don't know. We plotted everything. Everything you told me is in here. So if you have 6.7 hours a week that you don't know what happened. You can't give me a reason why that's a gap. What does that mean to you? And then we look at what they have for revenue and the hours that they invest. You can actually calculate an hourly. And then from that hourly, we start to calculate what drift costs them. And I had one rep that when we went through it, I think the calculation was there was $66,000 that he couldn't account for that was just gone. Poof, it's in the breeze. And that's what gets their attention. So what I try to do is when I'm modifying behavior, I back it up with statistics, conversion ratios. I want to make sure that they understand that this is not just a conversation. There are real numbers behind this. And it's amazing how behavior starts to change a little bit. And that drift, my goal is to reduce drift every week.
Well, I like that a lot. It seems like the tool that you're using that helps calculate that is much better than what I use with folks, which is basically an Excel spreadsheet. But I concur in that when that exercise is assigned, there's a lot of kicking and streaming and some pushback on it.
There is.
So I've gone through that myself. And as painful as it is to go through, it's typically the most eye-opening thing that you can go through. And I suggest people do this. Not everyone does, but like rather than looking at my day reflectively all the time in terms of like time spent, I literally lay out everything in my calendar from what time I'm waking up, when I'm journaling, lemon water that I'm drinking, first thing in the morning, driving to the gym, driving back from the gym, showering, lunch, all that type of stuff is business development time, reading. I'm very much all right, this is on my calendar. This is what I need to do now. So I think that can be in the next iteration once they kind of see where they're spending their time or not spending their time, then just saying, okay, well, what do I want my day to be like? Leverage the heck out of your calendar and just do what it tells you to do.
And that's the crossover between accountability and visualization. What do I want my calendar to look like? And if you actually take the time to plot everything that's happening and then compare it to what you wish were happening, that's accountability and vision blended together. So like I said, each one of these 7 categories is more like a Venn diagram. There's crossover. And that's a good example of that crossover.
So before we pivot slightly, the last thing that I want to hit on, and I was terrible at this when I was an advisor, and I felt like it was perhaps more of like as you alluded to, kind of sales and product oriented culture, less so on running the business. And I don't want to pass all the blame because I need to be accountable to myself and do what needs to be done. But I was terrible in my 7 years as an advisor as it related to managing business finances. I always just assumed that future sales would solve any current problems. And it never worked out that way. So I guess my question is, how often should someone be viewing their business finances? And what are some of the main metrics that they should be keeping an eye on? Like, how do you view that in terms of what an advisor should be doing?
Well, I put together a marketing plan that I now incorporate and I use with the advisors. The first thing I ask them is, let me see your marketing and your business plan. It's usually not good. Mm-hmm. I'll be the first to admit it's some notes jotted on a page. It kind of terrifies me to see the people that are dealing with hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars that don't really have a plan. And you had mentioned earlier that these are advisors that are very, very good at what they do. They're very good with the products. They understand market fluctuations. They get all of that. When you ask them for the structure of the business plan, just babes in the wood. They just haven't spent a lot of time there. Once we have the marketing discussion and we realize, what do we have allocated for advertising? What about software platforms? You start to go down through the list of expenditures and see what that's going to be on a quarterly and yearly basis. Then we have to think about how that's going to be funded. Do they have money available? If you're a new rep, that's tough. You've got to go bare bones until you start to build in some of the revenue. And there's a habit that's there also that doesn't take place that I try to ingrain, which is keep it as simple as possible. If it's complex, it won't happen. If it's simple, it probably will. So I will tell people, okay, you just had this case go through. Take 10% of that goes into your marketing fund right now. It's like taxes. Don't touch it. It goes over there. Don't touch it. That helps to build a marketing slush fund that you can use if something that's not on your marketing plan comes up, but you want to fund it. You've got something that's sitting there and it's growing behind you because it's constantly being funded. But the time that we spend it's different if you're an independent advisor or if you're part of a large firm, if you're part of a team. So there are breakdowns that happen. There are expenditures that happen. There are teams that work together and their payout, their grid may be different depending on how the team is set up. So there's a lot of components. It's not an easy answer, but you have to look at all the expenditures first. And then the funding will come from what they have already or how they're continually funding it. The idea, and this goes to your question about timing and how often, is I have the business plan and the marketing plan like two sides of a coin. So one is dependent on the other, and you can't have them separated. So the marketing plan that I built out for people, actually, it's fairly dynamic and it's engaging. So they're entering information every single week into the marketing plan I have because it calculates it. You may figure it out. I'm kind of a numbers guy. I really want to know what penetration ratios are, conversion ratios are, what were your bounce rates and click-through rates on the last program. All of these things become part of this dynamic marketing plan. So when I go to an advisor and say, where are we? Instead of an advisor saying, oh, we're doing pretty well. That tells me nothing. But I get that answer all the time in the beginning. I wanted to get to the part where they're able to, on a weekly basis, be able to tell me exactly where they are in every program, what it's generated for revenue, what the overall cost was. So the marketing plan and the business plan are completely tied together. Separating them doesn't make any sense. Do you start out, oh, here, I got $5,000 to spend on marketing. What should I do with it? That's rookie behavior. And what I want to see is professional behavior where there are lines of funding that go into certain programs, and the conversion ratios and the success rate of that program will determine whether or not it's going to be included in the next marketing plan. If you don't know how well something's performing, how do you make a decision about it? I've done this before. I'll give you a quick example. You've got 3 different target markets you're pursuing. Okay, market A, market B, market C. Market A, you go through how much you spent, time invested, what's your hourly rate? Like I have them calculate what they make per hour. What was the overall performance level? How many new clients were gained? All those numbers are calculated. So you come to the conclusion, okay, I made $538.12 running this one marketing vertical. That's what I made per hour. Terrific. B, same thing, runs through the same process. Okay, this was $273.11 per hour. Great. C, what was C? $11.74. And there's an indication that the marketing vertical that you're pursuing, there's a problem. You're sending the wrong message, you're using the wrong communication tools, or you shouldn't be in that market at all. So that will then trigger analysis of that market. And the question is, do we continue with that market down the road or do we dump it entirely? Because we're going to take the money that was invested there and we're going to reinvest it. What I come across on a daily basis, and it's frustrating, I know it's frustrating for the client, it's frustrating for me, is that level of analysis does not take place on a regular basis. It doesn't. And clients get to the end of the year and they look back and they're like, hey, I missed my target by 20% where I thought it was going to be. Well, if you wait to the end of the year, that's going to happen. If it becomes part of your regular accountability and you're looking at it weekly, monthly, quarterly, that's going to be resolved before you get to the end of the year. And then you're not dealing with the giant 20% gap.
Yeah, a lot of that resonates with me. And I think it's important for folks to just catch the problem or capitalize on the opportunity, whichever way it shakes out, in a week, as opposed to, in 5 or 7 months. Like the whole idea of setting these goals and targets at the beginning of the year, and then just hoping, wishing and praying and working towards accomplishing it, and then seeing where you land at the end of the year. You're either going to find out that you're ahead of pace to hitting what you're going to hit. Cool. Let's readjust the goals up. Or if you're behind, okay, well, now we've got to figure out what we adjust. So I 100% agree with that. To pivot slightly, and for those of you who this may be the first episode that you're listening to, one of the things that we do with all of our guests is figuring out what one of their favorite books is, or a book that had an impact on them. And we do so to be able to distill a reading list for everyone. So these links are in the show notes. Feel free to scribble it down on your end, but would highly recommend that you go through and consider, reading or listening to these books. So Greg, you had mentioned there was a book that you recently read where you got about 3/4 of the way through, and then you went back, started over and grabbed your highlighter and, started really kind of going through it with a fine tooth comb, because there was a lot of good information in there. And it's called Face Values. Authors' last names are Lobus and Holloway. Why'd you pick that book, and what sort of impact has it had on you so far?
When I'm not engaged in business. I'm just trying to get some downtime. I read a lot of international thrillers and a lot of CIA and things like that. And one of the things I've always found curious is that we look for micro expressions on people's faces. If you're a poker player, it's called a tell. The CIA uses it to tell if someone they're speaking to is lying. I found that fascinating that, before anybody's ever opened their mouth or said a single word, you can tell some of the things that are going on with that person. Face Values was one of those books that deals with looking at a facial expression, seeing lines on the face, and understanding more about the personality that actually created the creases and lines on somebody's face. So what's the value there? Well, once you learn to realize what those creases and the crow's feet around the eyes and the smile lines and the furrowed brow and what they call the inverted V that goes between the eyes, those all mean something and they're personality traits. So when I started reading through the book, I was like, okay, maybe this book isn't as hokey as I thought it was, because there was a lot of scientific evidence behind what they were saying. That's when I went back to the beginning. I said, Greg, you got to pay more attention now. So I started going through the highlighter, and they separate into 4 different personality types, and they're given different colors. And you can go through it, but a lot of us have seen these, Myers-Briggs discs, the personality inventories. What I found fascinating about this book is that how accurate it was. It got to the point where I put the book down, I went into the bathroom, and I started making faces, and I started talking and watching my own face. My original assumption as to which color I was wrong, because I had a perception of who I thought I was. But then I started to look at the facial expressions and what I saw, and I have 2 lines that go between my eyes, and it's, the sign of a thinker, what they call a thinker, that's in the book. And I really started to go back and highlight and pick out the things. And it gave me a better understanding of who I was and who I am to other people. And the point of the book is it gives you an idea of who you're talking to. Do you adjust your behavior? Do you adjust your conversation? In this book, there are drivers and there are expressives, and we've heard those terms before. Well, if you try to address or sell or draw in a client who's a driver using expressive techniques, it's already game over. You're done. They're looking for the opportunity to end that conversation. So for our industry, I found this to be really helpful, because once you understand the person sitting across the table from you, you know the language and the personality traits that you need to exhibit to actually keep them in the conversation. So fascinating book.
Yeah, it even gives you an opportunity to be more cognizant of what they're doing, so that to a certain degree you can kind of mirror their behavior so they feel even more comfortable that they're sitting across from someone that's just like them.
That's right.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out because I haven't read that one before. Now, Greg, if I'm an advisor and I say, hey, I need some help with my vision, I need some help with my mission, I need some help with my practice management, marketing, accountability, whatever it may be that we chatted about today, where do I find you? Where do I kind of explore what it's like to engage with you? Where should I go?
Okay. I'm on LinkedIn. That's the easiest place and probably the fastest place to get to me. Look up Greg Bishop and I'm there. My website, which is Poterus.com. So it's Poterus.com. A lot of what we've discussed over this last hour is there. So the outline of the 7 areas, different things that I do with people. I have speaking engagements. So I've spoken at a number of kickoff meetings and mid-year meetings where I touch on a lot of this. And then we'll have advisors that will either come up to me right after the presentation or they'll reach out to me later. It's kind of strange. I've spoken at firms before, and I've had advisors say, can we have a conversation, but don't tell my firm that I'm reaching out to you, which always catches me off guard. I'm like, well, listen, I'm not really going to get into that kind of thing. I don't want to have that type of relationship, but it speaks to the bigger issue. There's something you saw, heard, felt, smelled today that really got your attention. So you're reaching out. And I don't know if it's going back to, I don't want to call out my firm, which I get. I understand that. But I'm certainly open to those type of conversations. The programs that I have, I usually run a 1-year program with a client where we're meeting once a week or possibly twice a month, depending on how far along that continuum the client is. And there are variations of that. Like I said, structured but malleable. I'll change a program to an individual based on their developmental level. Mm-hmm. How far along am I? Do I need fine tuning and tweaking? Or do I need a complete overhaul because I just don't know what the heck I'm doing here? So that program will change. And that's the reason why I keep that malleable component in place. But again, website, email address, greg.bishop@poterus.com. Very straightforward. I would love to get some feedback from some of the people that listen to this podcast.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. With that being said, for everyone who is listening today, appreciate your time. If you would be so kind as to share this episode with someone that you think would find it to be helpful. A lot of good nuggets in there to be used as takeaways and actually implement them so they have an impact on you. And if you would be so kind as to leave us a review on iTunes or whatever platform you use, definitely help with our reach to other advisors throughout the country. So appreciate all your help. Greg, fantastic having you on the episode today. Hopefully we'll chat soon.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it very much for your time and questions. I enjoyed it very much.
Awesome. Take care.
All right. Thanks.